We'll start things off with Photoshop's filters. Now, I've opened up barn1.jpg. He's our sample file that we'll start with inside this chapter. You'll find him inside the Chapter 11 folder, which is inside your project files folder, which you copied onto your computer. So go ahead and open him up. I'm also going to hit Shift-Tab here, as always, to get rid of our panels over on the right-hand side. We don't need them just yet. Okay, so I'm going to head up to the Filter menu way up at the top of the screen here. And if you've messed around a little bit with Photoshop, you probably made your way into the filters already. This is where all the fun stuff is inside Photoshop. You can create all kinds of neat effects here. Now, some of the filters are used obviously for special effects and so on. For example, the artistic filters I could use to create painterly effects and artistic effects and so on. Other effects like the unsharp mask, for example, that's more of a corrective filter that you could use. So some filters are used for special effects. They're more destructive filters. Other filters are more corrective. So you'll have to poke around in here, experiment, see what you can come up with. What I've decided to do is add sort of a film grain to my photograph of my barn here. So what I'm going to do is I'll head up to the filter menu, down to noise, and then I'll choose add noise. And I met with the add noise dialog box here. I can already see a little bit of grain in there inside my image. I have this preview window as well where I can view my image. I can actually drag around inside here, zoom out a little bit if I like, or zoom back in if I like, pan around inside there. And then down at the bottom here, usually with your filters, you'll have some sort of controls where you can increase or decrease the effect that you're applying. So here, my amount slider here, I have distribution uniform or Gaussian there. I have that as well. And also down at the bottom here, monochromatic. And really the idea here with your filters is just to play and experiment and see what you can get. And what's interesting is some filters, like the add noise filter, has its own dialog box like this. So in that situation, I can actually use my keyboard shortcuts inside Photoshop to zoom in on my image if I want to have a closer look at the filter's effect. And other filters open up in what we call the filter gallery, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So I'm going to go and set up my filter here. I'll turn on Gaussian and maybe I'll turn on monochromatic again, something like this. Maybe drop my amount down just a little bit. Don't want it too grainy, something like that. I'll zoom out and have a look at my overall image. That looks pretty good to me. I'll click on OK. And there's my film grain on my barn. Now, if you don't like the effect that you've applied to your image, you can always undo one level, or you could use your history to back up several history states if you like. I'm just going to hit Control-Z here on my keyboard, or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that step. This time I decide that I want to create some kind of a vector style effect for my barn here. So what I'm going to do is I will head back up to the filter menu, down to Artistic, and then Cutout. And if you're not sure what I meant by a vector style effect, I wanted something like this, which I'm seeing inside the preview window. And obviously my dialog box is taking up my entire screen here. This is the filter gallery inside Photoshop. So the filter gallery is going to give you this large thumbnail of your image. You can use your keyboard shortcuts again if you want to zoom in and zoom out. I'm just hitting Control minus and Control plus here, or of course on the Mac, Command plus and Command minus. In the center column here, I'll have some, but not all of my filters inside Photoshop, and they're all categorized here. So for example, sketch and texture and so on. You can explore around there. I'm obviously on my cutout here, which is underneath artistic. And then over on the right-hand side, I have my controls for the currently selected filter. So for this particular filter, maybe I decide I want to make some adjustments here, number of levels. That should increase the detail of my effect here. Edge simplicity. And really, you just have to monkey here to see what effects you'll achieve. So let's say I'm happy with something like that. That's fantastic. Now, what's neat about the filter gallery here is I can add on additional filters onto my image. Let's say, for example, I wanted to make it look like this barn was actually painted on watercolor paper. Well, it already has sort of a watercolory look to it, but I'm going to go a little bit further here. Down at the bottom right, I have a little button here, New Effect Layer. I'll click on that guy, and that duplicates my cutout filter. It's almost like I have layers here inside my filter gallery. Now, what I'm going to do is inside the center column here, I'll collapse artistic, and I'll go down to sketch, and there's watercolor paper. And what's happened there, down in the bottom right, is the newly selected filter has taken the place of the previously selected layer, if that makes sense. So now with my watercolor paper selected, I can come over to the right here again and adjust my settings. And again, each filter is going to have its own custom settings here. Maybe I'll drop my contrast just a little bit, something like that. What's really interesting about this as well is I can go back to the cutout, make some adjustments there. Maybe I'll pull up my edge fidelity. Maybe I'll drop my number of levels, something like that. Go back to my water paper. Adjust that fiber length, for example, something like this. Monitoring my effect over on the left-hand side. Bring up my brightness a little bit. Bring up my contrast a little bit. Back and forth as many times as I want to achieve the result that I'm after. Now imagine this, maybe I change my mind completely. I'm not happy with my water paper at all. So at any time I can choose a new filter. I can either choose a new filter from the center column, or I can even drop down this menu right up at the top here and go and find a different filter that I want to use. As a matter of fact, the one that I'm after is Paint Daubs. So I'll choose him. Now I'm really getting a watercolor effect over here. And again, same story. Brush size, I could crank that up if I wanted to. I'm really losing a lot of detail in my barn, so I better drop that down because I don't want to lose my detail. And same with my sharpness. And I have a brush type here as well. I'm going to go dark rough. Give me something like that. That looks pretty wild. And down in this bottom area where I have my layers, if I'm really not happy with my paint daubs, if I want to go back to where I started, I could just click on the little eye icon, and that would disable paint daubs in my example here, or I could turn it back on. And don't forget, I could go back to cutout, make some adjustments at the top, go back to paint daubs, make some additional adjustments here. Maybe I'll change my brush type back to simple here, something like that. That's looking pretty good. At any time, I can go down and add in a new effect layer. There, I've duplicated my paint daubs. Maybe I'll go into distort here, choose glass. Now I have something like this happening. And you know what? Maybe I decide, well, I'm not really happy with that glass effect there. So I'll make sure he's selected here over on the right, and I'll just use my trash can down in the bottom right, get rid of that effect layer. Now I'm back to where I was. And I'm pretty happy with that effect, so I'll click on OK. And of course the effect gets applied to my barn inside Photoshop. So that's pretty cool. Now, the only thing about applying filters inside Photoshop, using the techniques, using the methods that I've shown you here, is that we've destroyed our original image. There's no way to go back. If I save this image and close out of Photoshop, it's a done deal. I can never get my image back. So what I'll show you next is how to work with your filters in a non-destructive manner.